thank you for joining us. Or for those of you who are already here, what I would love is to ask you to post in the comments if you can, just to see if I can see them. In the meantime, I'm Nancy Sheet of Sheet Communications, and I am very, very, very happy dance excited to be with my friend, pal, and SEO expert extraordinaire, Patrick Powers. Patrick, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Again, we are here to talk about kind of the transition from Universal Analytics, which is the current version of Google Analytics, to, sorry, hi, Phyllis. Okay, great. I can see comments. Excellent. I know that we're not talking to a void. Welcome, Phyllis. We're here to talk about Universal Analytics, which, Patrick, for those people who don't know, is the current version of Google Analytics, to the shift and transition to Google Analytics 4, which is coming. What's the date officially? Is it July or November?
July 1, I believe.
Yeah, it's moved a little bit, right? So this is going to be the new way to measure the backside of our, websites. And we will no longer even have access to Universal Analytics the way we used to measure analytics, right?
Maybe.
Oh,
yeah. And we could talk about that, about what that means and what that means for your data. So,
okay. Well,
and
the reason we're talking about it now is because we want people to have some time to be, onboarding the new while they still have access to the old, to make sure they're capturing sort of not necessarily similar data, but other data, right?
Correct.
So that kind of leads us into, if you want to go there, like we've talked a little bit about the date, but can I turn the floor over to you to sort of say, what's the difference, right? Is this just a different version and it's going to look the same and we just have to click a button? Or when we get into GA4, is it going to look drastically different?
Yes, and yes to all of those questions. That's the shortest answer possible, right? No, I do want to take a step back, just in part, just to clarify, like, this isn't something that is coming. This is something that is here. So GA4 has existed since 2020. The best thing to come out of 2020, right? With GA4, maybe. That's a horrible.
I didn't know we were going to be doing jokes here, Patrick.
I know, right? I'm a comedy writer. No, so it's been around for a little while. The impetus for our conversation, I believe, is that there is a looming deadline in place, that Google Analytics said that it will no longer provide data for Universal Analytics after that July 1 date. Universal Analytics, was the third version of Google Analytics out there. If people, really want to dig up references to Urchin or Google Analytics Classic, was version 2.
I remember Classic, but that's all.
Yeah, Urchin was the very first one. But at this point in time, you would still, to my understanding, now I don't work for Google, still be able to access your Universal Analytics data, but it will no longer be collected and served up to you the way that it is today. So you'll be able to see and compare and look back into the past. You just won't, moving forward, have any of that data available. So hence the need to,
I already have questions, but
excellent. Yeah, hence the need to move into GA4. Your question is, what's the difference between GA4 and Universal Analytics? It depends on what level you are used to using these particular platforms. So in some cases, will you be able to see, how many people visited my website, kind of at the highest level? Yes, and it'll kind of look and feel the same. But for power users, or for people who are trying to get more actionable data out of this particular property, it's vastly different. And it has to do with the base level of how the measurement model works between Universal Analytics and GA4. So without getting too terribly deep into the weeds, Universal Analytics is based on pages and page views and sessions. And so it was a great product for websites, right? How many page views did a particular web page get based on the URL, based on the number of users, and how many sessions did those users have? And it was all kind of tracked with that cookie. And it was a nice way to go about it. GA4 really is an advancement in that it is intended to track beyond just websites with the integration of mobile applications. Think things like digital kiosks at the mall, or the way that your refrigerator acts with the internet. Is that a page view because you told your refrigerator to order more oranges from Whole Foods? I don't think it's a page view necessarily, but it is a view of something. And so GA4 really is intended to collect data from multiple places, to create multiple data streams, and to bring that together into one location. To do that, it breaks free from kind of that page view and session measurement model, and it is all based upon events. And so you'll hear me say that word a lot today. An event is any particular action that might have occurred inside of a web page or an application. A page view is considered an event. Scrolling is considered an event. A click is considered an event. A download is considered an event. Starting a YouTube video, stopping a YouTube video, those are all events. Okay. And so as opposed to being based on page views and sessions, GA4 really is a measurement model based on events. How many of these activities are all happened and all happening?
Okay. Well, and I want to go back for 2 seconds and say, I love events. We're not talking about those type of events. So I appreciate I appreciate you clarifying, what an event is. And I think also for this audience, and again, I'm very happy because for people who are watching or in the comments, we're going to make some assumptions that none of us are dealing with refrigerators in this group. And this is more probably, in terms of small businesses, solopreneurs, slightly smaller entities than enterprise units. But I still think some of these events are going to be key in helping them make more sense out of, what I think Google Analytics used to kind of give you a report, people's eyes would glaze over and they're like, okay, thanks for sending me this report, but what does it mean? And I think why I'm excited is GA4 is going to kind of be easier to understand what's working versus it requiring a translator like you or me to kind of have to figure out what the story is that's going on in the analytics, right?
Right. And I think, if we keep with the question of what's the difference, or maybe where's the opportunity here with GA4, is I do believe this is a fantastic time for entities large and small to consider, why are you measuring what's going on in your website in the first place? And to take your measurement, your analytics program, if you will, beyond just those vanity metrics of look how many people looked at our stuff, to look how many people looked at our stuff, but then took some type of action. Maybe they filled out a form, maybe they made a phone call, maybe they sent you an email, but to then say, okay, not only how do we influence the volume of traffic, which I think so many people have been concerned about in the past, we just need more eyeballs, more eyeballs, more eyeballs, but how do we influence the behavior of that traffic? So how do we get those eyeballs or those people looking at your site to then take that next step to apply, request information, to do something a little bit more tangible?
Okay, I do want to dive into that, but I think we might also, before we get into that, we're going to talk about sort of what this transition looks like. And I think, Patrick, also what we have talked about is this is also an ideal opportunity if you haven't, right? If you just basically are like, I know it's back there, I haven't been looking. This is actually a great time with kind of a clean slate to get in at the front to sort of understand what you want to be measuring and getting a sense of what you'd be reading and what you're looking for. And going back to your question of why are you measuring this? And I would also say, like, back to 101, what are you measuring, right? Like figuring out what it is, and how does this fit with either your business goals or your marketing goals? So can you talk a little bit, this is getting down into the pragmatic, but it's a question I've been asking you for 6 months, and I've been watching you introduce to some of our clients. What does this transition look like? Is it a flip of a switch? Is it a saying yes? Is it a, what does it actually look like? Because it seems very in the cloud and far away from us, but there's some kind of pragmatic things people can do.
Yeah. So there's a good way and a bad way to go about it. And
Love
what
it.
I want to hopefully help people avoid is the bad way, which is if you were to log into Universal Analytics today and you have not yet set up GA4, it's going to provide you a prompt and say, hey, we will do this for you. And it is as simple as a click of a button. In cases where you have anything beyond just the bare bones running, that simple click of a button may not translate necessarily into what you want to measure. And so it's not that easy. The better way to kind of go about it is to, yes, follow the steps that Google provides, in terms of properly setting up a data stream, properly setting up custom events and parameters that means something to you from a measurement perspective. Now, sometimes that does require, you to do one of two things: either kind of become that expert yourself and do a lot of reading, or it's to talk to someone who's done this before, someone like myself. Plenty of people who have specialized in these types of transitions, but to get that help to make sure that you do it correctly. Okay. The last thing you want to do is to kind of click that button, take the easy way out, and it's not quite measuring appropriately for what's happening on your site. And then you start to make business decisions based on bad data.
Oh, okay. All right.
Right.
Yeah. So bear with me as I do a little bit of layperson translating.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think you get the weeds a little bit.
No, I love this. This is where the nerd accountant comes out. But you mentioned if you don't have your data stream, if you haven't touched your Google Analytics and you haven't played with the data stream, what would that look like in lay terms? And I'm going to use, again, clients you and I have used for an example. We've put Search Console, integrated that into some people's analytics, or we've measured maybe some conversions to membership or to a purchase. Can you give some examples of what it would mean to just maybe things that you've already put into play with your Google Analytics before we talk about this jump to GA4?
Yeah, sure. So oftentimes what I see a lot of is Universal Analytics implementations that are running and they've been collecting data for years, and people have added either custom events, meaning, they have told Google to collect bits of information when someone clicks a specific button. And I'll give you an example.
Super.
So let's say you have a request for information form on your website. And when you submit that particular form, in Universal Analytics, you would fire an event. And based in Universal Analytics, you were able to append 3 pieces of information to that event. Okay. A category, the action, and the label. Oftentimes the category would be, this is a request for information. The action would be submit. And the label would be maybe the page where it appears, or the name of that particular form. And you were kind of limited to those little nuggets of information that were associated with that particular event. With GA4, you want to still measure that same event, but the ability to scale that event and the data tracked around it is, I was going to say limitless, but I know there's a limit on the number of custom dimensions you could have. Okay. But you could create custom fields that said, this is the page location where it appears. This is, the section of the site that it's on. This is the date that this form was added to the website. And you can append all of that information to that particular event through custom parameters and custom dimensions that weren't available with Universal Analytics. So, but to take it kind of a step back, if you will, the first thing is deciding, do we want to be tracking those form submissions? And if so, what is the information that we need associated with it to say, hey, maybe we ran this ad here, or we had this social media post here, or we did some SEO work here. How are those marketing channels leading to people to engaging in that behavior?
Right. I appreciate kind of the back. And then, Patrick, when people we're going to make the assumption that people get help from either an SEO person, or I know I'm talking to a couple of website designers. This is also something that they, probably not to the depth or degree that you do, but they have the ability, again, to get things set up on the back end for Google Analytics. Are there some basic standard, let's say, things to be measuring, or kind of automatic top line things that the new GA4 is going to give us that might have different words or names than what we used to, as you said, look at? Page views, sessions. One of my favorite ones was referring traffic. One of mine was most popular content. Are there some baseline?
People like to look at the bounce rate.
Pardon?
Right? People like to look at the bounce rate.
They do like to, yeah.
That's a change.
It is. Right? Okay. All right. So I've already said ahead, but what are some of those, are there some of those things that they're going to present?
With Universal Analytics, it was always kind of a page view session type of tracking. GA4, recognizing people were building tons of custom events to do things like track a file download, to track how far people scroll down a page, to track video engagement. By default, at its base level, GA4 will track all of those events. Right. It sounds great. It sounds great. And at a very base
magically,
level, right. Yes, it is great. And if you work with someone who says, oh yeah, we'll turn GA4 on for you, most likely it will include all of those default events.
Okay.
Now, what I will challenge you to do, though, is to take it kind of one step further, because even at their base level, the default events aren't necessarily always going to be enough to get at what you want your site specifically to do. So whether it's place an order or request information or apply, actions you want people to take usually do require creation of additional events.
Okay.
So I'm going to pause here, because there's kind of two concepts with GA4 that if you leave this session today with its understanding, it's one, custom events, and two, it's conversions.
Okay.
So the custom events are going to be any activity, specific activity that you want to have happening on your website. And so that might be, like I said, file downloads. It might be clicks on a particular button. It might be engagement with a video. And those are all events that can be tracked with GA4. The next level is to then mark specific events as points of conversion. So if you're familiar with Universal Analytics, they used to have a little feature in there called goals. And you were able to create goals based on either custom events or destination URLs. Like if someone landed on a thank you page, that was considered a goal. And you could start to see people moving through that funnel to build that goal. With GA4, those are called conversions.
Okay.
And personally, I really like them a lot better in GA4 for two reasons. Is you can build multiple step conversions, in that if you want people to follow a particular pathway to lead to your determined conversion, you can do that, which wasn't particularly easy in a previous version.
I was about to say,
right.
2 steps on the website, I always felt like we were looking at dead ends and had to make guesses or assumptions.
To make adjustments, right.
At other data places, like, okay, then you had to go look at the newsletter analytics to see if somebody actually got on the newsletter, right? Like,
right.
It always felt like there were dead ends with the Universal Analytics. And I wanted to, while I'm interrupting you, say hello to Thomas, hello Phyllis, whoever else is watching and haven't posted. Please feel free to put questions in, or I'd be curious to know sort of if you have converted yet, or you even knew this was a thing, or if you're an avid Google Analytics user, or, never even looked at the back end. So please put questions in. So thank you for letting me interrupt, Patrick.
No, I was going to say the second thing that I love about conversions, that GA4 includes, AI, like everything else in the world today, AI is built into GA4. And so you will start to get insights based on your conversions. And so it will start to flag for you anomalies that are happening on your website, good trends, bad trends, in a way that actually provides good information of what's really happening online for your site. If you've identified those points of conversions, one, Google Analytics can start to tell you where things are going right or where things are going wrong. An additional benefit to that is you can then tie Google ad campaigns to those conversions as well. And so to optimize some of your paid search or some of your CPC campaigns to conversions happening on your website. So
that was one of my questions was how does paid work with organic in the new GA4? And so, I think, again, some people just think of Google as, the pay to play, and that's all Google's there for is, to have you show up somewhere. So if I hear you correctly, there's an integration now. There's going to be a cohesive integration that's maybe a little better than it was before.
Yeah, there's always been that integration. It always takes some additional steps, but I think the AI component and the ability to build, really specific and complex conversions, if you so choose, is really a great addition. And I like to, having done a lot of GA4 conversions in the past year, and a lot more on the plate that still have to be completed. I like to ding Google a lot and be like, oh, this is such a headache. This is such a pain, right? And this is something that is kind of annoying. But the reality is so many clients aren't paying for this. This is still a free service. And the measurement capabilities are really impressive. And so if you're running a business or an organization and you have a website, like most businesses and organizations do, this is a really great resource to say, hey, is the time, effort, and energy that we're putting into this website even worth it? Right. And so I do have to give them their due in that it's still free today. Today, it's still free.
Well, exactly. But, and I think also when I'm talking to people and, it's like, we should do more on social media. And I'm like, yes, why? But what are you asking them to do on social media? And what are you going to do if that platform goes away? Guess what platform you own, and control and is your home base for most, I won't say for all entities, but why aren't you taking care of that digital home or worrying about that as much as your other kind of platforms and distribution channels? So you know me, I'm a huge fan of it. But I'm cognizant that some people's brains, don't think that way or they glaze over. But you and I both had great success stories where just by diving in, we had some major ahas of, oh my gosh, did you know this site was performing this well? Oh my gosh, did you know you were being found for this? Did you know you were the leader, in this query? Or, here's an underutilized opportunity. So for that reason alone, I feel like it's a great tool and resource for informing the decision you want to go and helping you either then, to your point, are the things we're trying to do working or are they not? What is working, what isn't, and what do we need to do along the way?
Right.
Patrick, you mentioned, I feel like we're going to keep covering about the key features as you walk through. Sure. You mentioned you've been setting this up for people. You and I have had some clients we've worked together on, that you even got set up last year. What are some of the pitfalls either you and doing it for other people have expected? Right. Or what are the things you're warning people to be on the lookout for? And first one is, I'm hearing you say, don't just click the box and let Google do it for you. That's one.
Right. The four kind of most common pitfalls that I see. The first being your code's not in the right spot to begin with, right? So Google Analytics, whether it's universal or GA4, is really specific about where this code needs to appear on a page. And so, sometimes people utilize WordPress sites and they utilize plugins and try to inject the code that way. Sometimes Google likes that, sometimes it doesn't. So ensuring that the code is in the right place to begin with, and that's whether it's universal or GA4, is oftentimes a big pitfall that I see for people. They're like, it's not tracking right, it's not working right. Your code's in the wrong place. The easiest way to determine is my code in the right place is, I'm a big Chrome user. There's an extension called Google Tag Assistant that you can put onto your browser, and it will give you a little smiley face if it's in the right spot. They'll give you a little frowny face if it's not. So that's the number one pitfall that I see. The second pitfall that I see is a lot of people want to track, oh, did someone submit our form, right? There's a very common thing to track to say, how many leads are we generating? If that form is embedded with an iframe, Google Analytics is not going to be able to see it. So you can see how often that page was loaded, but you won't be able to see what happens within that iframe. Iframe embeds are really easy and common with a lot of form places or a lot of lead generation collection softwares. If you have the option, embedding it with a JavaScript is going to be a much better embed option to allow you to track that type of activity.
Okay, you're going a little ninja. You're going a little ninja. So I'm going to go up for lay people and say,
yep.
Predominantly, and this is again, we're kind of focusing on WordPress, but I know a couple of people that were going to watch this actually are on DIY builders, which is a whole different kettle of fish we can talk about. But for the most part, if you're potentially using a website builder on top of the WordPress platform, typically you probably also have some sort of a form plugin, right? Or you've pulled an API off of something that's compatible, like a MailChimp, and dropped it onto your website, right? That's what, when you say iframe, you've kind of pulled a chunk of a form that talks to something else and put it right on your site. And that's what the iframe looks like. It's not properly coded into your website. That's what you mean.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So MailChimp is a great example. Salesforce, another example. Like, depending on how you embed those forms can impact your ability to track submissions to them inside of Google Analytics.
Okay.
The third pitfall that I see is when people fail to understand the boundaries of their own site. So they may be using a third party for, let's say, jobs, right? You have some job opportunities at your organization, and maybe you've partnered with Workday or some other third party. And when they click jobs, they go out to that third party. Or the same thing, like, maybe subscribe and you hit the subscribe button and it goes out to a third party. When you leave that domain where GA4 does not exist, GA4 is not going to be able to see inside of some of those particular properties. And then the fourth, pitfall that I see is that it can be overwhelming. Right? It can be a lot. The power behind GA4, like if you just turn it on and you like to see the number of views, that's great. But because you can customize and add dimensions and customize metrics in an easier way than you ever could before, the ability to scale it exists, and it can be a lot to weed through. There's also, and this is where I do kind of dig Google a little bit, in that, some of the things have changed names or slightly adjusted. So for example, page views is a common metric that you have said that, oh yeah, I log into Google Analytics, I see how many page views something has, and that tells me, how many times that page was viewed. There's no page views metric in GA4. There's a views metric, but it's slightly different because of the way that it gets measured. There's a page view event, right? And so there's little nuances like that that make it a little bit annoying at times.
And that, because we've seen it in a couple of client reports, but that, Patrick, then asked me the question of, is there a tutorial of, if you used to look at page views, this is now, I feel like there needs to be a bit of a Rosetta Stone, right? That comes through and kind of helps us translate or bridge from one language to the slightly different language. And maybe there's another webinar for us to do once everybody's up and running on that.
Yeah.
I think, or how are you walking through it with clients right now who have both up and running? Like, is it easier actually to do that and say, let's look at the two, so you get a sense of how we're thinking about it now? What does that look like?
No. I don't like to look at the two side by side.
Okay.
And I tell clients that when you look at the two side by side, they're going to be off by a little bit. Okay. And I don't want you to get hung up on, well, this says 3-page views and this says 2 views.
Okay.
Like, well, which one is it? Well, they're metrics that were measured in a different way.
Okay.
What I encourage people to look for in any of these metrics are the trends, right? Are you increasing the number of views on your site, or are you decreasing? Are you improving the engagement rate, or is it sliding a little bit?
Right.
And so to take your metaphor a little bit further, do we need a Rosetta Stone? I don't think it's necessarily a whole foreign language,
okay,
so much as it's a dialect, right?
Okay.
And that there's just little nuances in that, page views and views. Are they the same thing? Well, someone who's in the weeds like me, I'd be like, no, they're so vastly different. How could you even suggest that they were the same thing? But someone who at a high level is just like, I just need to know, are people looking at this thing?
Yeah.
Yes, it's the same thing,
okay.
right?
Okay.
And the numbers aren't going to be 1 for 1, and they were measured differently in a nerd view. But yeah.
Well, and I think you also, answered the question, because like I said, so you're basically looking at it on the back end to just make sure going forward that GA4 is capturing what people wanted to be capturing. So on the back end, if you're helping people, that's what you're looking at, but you're not telling people like, keep looking at the two to make sure you can compare apples to apples. Like, that's not going to happen. Okay.
Correct. Like so often I have people say, well, we had X number of page views in March of this year, and this says X number of views. Why aren't they lining up?
Yeah.
They're not going to be line up. Now, as soon as I say that, I also have clients that be like, oh, look, they lined up perfectly. And you're like, oh, of course.
Right. Yeah. So that answers my other question. So for the next year, or from the point at which people move to GA4, is it going to be hard to have a year-over-year comparison? What is that going to look like in measuring?
Yeah, you won't be able to have a year-over-year in GA4 if you haven't set it up a year prior, right? So you will have inside of your Google Analytics account, you will have the old property, which is a Universal Analytics property, and you will have the new property, which is a GA4 property.
Okay.
And they can live side by side, and they might look pretty close to the same, if not exactly the same, but you won't have the historical record of the GA4 because it's not a time machine.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not going to be able to go back and be like, let me convert what was in Universal Analytics to GA4. Okay.
Correct. And so if you remember, I think you and I had this conversation last summer. I was screaming at a bunch of people like, you should set it up today so that when you do have to make the switch, you will have a year-over-year comparison. And I do have some clients that will have a year-over-year. If you have not yet set that up, I can't grant that genie wish to make that happen.
Yeah. So. I think that's helpful. Again, nerds like me want to like compare our apples to apples. And to your point, how can you see trends if you can't go backwards? But we're just going to be in this awkward transition. But I'm not sure we actually covered it, but I want to ask the question because I know you're getting it. If I choose to do nothing, what does it look like? Does Google force me into this? And do I wake up on, let's say, July 3rd and boom, I'm in GA4 and nothing else has happened? What does that look like?
Yeah, if you decide to do nothing, Google will just turn on the GA4 instance if you have Universal Analytics running today, right? It's just going to say, well, we'll keep this data flowing. So yeah, flip that easy switch. And there may be situations where that works for some people. What I have seen is when that easy switch has been flipped is that, it's not really the way I would have set it up. It's not really the information I wanted it to track. Oh, I had some old events or some old goals in Universal Analytics that no longer apply, but GA4 thinks that I still care about them, and it made a little bit of a mess. So will they force you into GA4? If you're using Google Analytics, Universal Analytics today, yeah, kind of.
Okay. If you do nothing, if you
do nothing, correct. In between now and then, what you will continue to see is if you haven't made that switch already, or even sometimes if you have, it will say oh, do you want us to do this switch? And it'll say, yeah, make that switch. And that's the easy button. And that's the one I'm always trepidatious about, and say, let's set up a custom environment. I think at the top of our conversation, I said, this is just a great opportunity to form a clean slate of what do we want to be measuring? What do we care about people doing on our website? And what events happen online that we want to know about?
Right.
And it gives you this is a great opportunity to have that clean slate that you don't always get in a digital world, right? Because it's always changing.
I'm going to take again kind of a break to say, anybody who's watching, please ask questions. We've got Patrick here for sort of another 10 minutes or so. I've got lots more questions, but if there are specific questions, please put them in the comments, and we'd love to try and get to them. So, Patrick, I mean, a slight sidebar before we get into sort of all the great and wonderful things that GA4 does, which I think you're already hitting upon, is what about people who have sites built on platforms that are a little more DIY, the Squarespaces, the Wix. Those are kind of the two that are popping up in my world. Squarespace more than Wix, but I have got, clients that have them on both. Again, they typically choose those because it's easier. And they'll say to me, oh, I have the analytics from Squarespace, or I have the analytics from Wix. I don't need Google Analytics. To which I say, there's no harm in putting Google Analytics on your site to get a little more information.
Correct. To which I'll counter with, if you are happy and you are getting actionable data from Squarespace, great, right? That can be a solution, and I don't want to overcomplicate things that don't need to be overcomplicated. But if you are using those systems and those platforms and you want a little bit more information, or you want it formatted and displayed in a way that can be shared, I do think that moving to GA4 is the best solution. With those platforms in particular, I think that GA4 works best, and you can get the most value out of it if it's working in tandem with other Google products. And that includes Tag Manager, which I know when I tell you those two words, you kind of get a little bit nervous and be like, he's going to get really in the weeds here. Like Tag Manager.
I'll translate in a second.
A whole nother level. So I think it works best when you have Tag Manager. And I also think when it works with Tag Manager to kind of implement it and to customize it. And then Looker Studio on the other end to take the data that is thrown into GA4 and to display it in a user-friendly way that can be shared and much more accessible than GA4 reports can be.
Okay, wait. Data Studio, or did you just call it something else?
Looker Studio. I called it Looker Studio, which is the new name.
Look at us introducing. I'm like, wait, Patrick.
Yeah, I didn't introduce it. It's been a couple months.
I never even knew we went from Data Studio. Well, okay. Yeah. So let's talk about those properties again, because I would so Tag Manager, again, for lay people, I'm going to sort of add on. It's an add-on or a plugin or a value add to the Google Analytics experience. Can I say it that way for simplistic reasons?
Yeah.
And the Data Studio is kind of allowing you to control the output and not just looking at the raw data. Like for most of us, we just go into Google Analytics and look at the analytics as it is, and we might change parameters, but we don't go in and drastically overhaul it from a reporting standpoint. But people like you make these beautiful, amazing, dynamic reports in what was called Data Studio and now is called Looker Studio. My question to you is, what about Search Console? Is that another one, or is that already inherently?
That's another part of the ecosystem.
Okay, that's not going to be built into GA4.
Not off the bat, not in the base level implementation.
Okay.
Right. And really, Search Console, and just for the people on the call, is just the Google's platform that allows you to see search data and behaviors about your site outside of your site, specifically in Google search. How many times did you show up for a keyword? How many times do people click on it?
Okay, Patrick, we have a question.
We have a
I don't know if
question.
you know.
Yes.
Yeah, can you see it on the screen? What are the best practices for setting
Can.
up GA4 data streams? I feel like we've covered it from a simplistic view, but this sounds a little more specific.
Yeah, well, and I think, Juan, thank you for the question. You say data streams. For most clients that I work with, there's only going to be one stream, right? The data stream, essentially think of it as the old tracking ID inside of Universal Analytics. So it used to, when you would set it up, it would say UA dash blah, 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 whatever that mechanism was. With the data stream, you are going to get a measurement ID that will be where you are sending that particular data. The reason that Google allows you to create multiple streams is if you are trying to connect multiple applications or locations. So maybe you have an iOS app, maybe you have an Android app. Most of the time, you're only going to have one stream if you're just measuring your website, right?
Yes, and if I know where, if I say your name wrong, sorry, I think I'm going to say Serlene. I can't remember. They may actually have different locations. They may be covering a region where
okay.
they potentially have different locations. So that actually might be a very relevant question. So
sure.
If
and
we
even
haven't
in
answered
that
the
case,
question, yeah,
I would say you can still set up a single stream to have all of that data if there's multiple, even if there's multiple subdomains, they can all flow into the same data stream. And you can then filter based on host name or do anything like that. The second thing I want to say about data streams is that in creating your data stream, by default, it's going to allow what it says is enhanced measurement. And these are some of those base level events that we talked about at the beginning, whether it's scrolling behavior or site search or video engagement or file downloads. Now, what I will say about those enhanced events is they may not be as enhanced as you want them to be. And so they still could require some tweaking within the stream. So for example, scrolls, it only measures if someone scrolls 90% down a page. If you want to track, did someone scroll a quarter of the way, halfway, 3/4, or 100%? You do have to build some custom events to track that additional scroll depth percentage. Or with site search, you can say, yes, we want it to track all the site search. But then if you want to know the term that people typed into your site search to navigate around on your site, you do have to append a custom dimension to say, I want to be able to filter by search term, things like that. So.
And I'm confirming, yes, they do have different regions. That's why Sterling's going to end up having different data streams. So thank you for that great question. If we've got more questions, please share them. We got a little bit more time. Patrick, I think we talked.
Yeah. I think I want to answer her question a little bit deeper too, if that's
okay. Great.
In that if you do have different regions and you want that data to be reported separately, or I set up an instance recently where they wanted internal traffic filtered out of a particular data stream. In those cases, if you want it to be reported out differently, I would suggest creating a separate property as opposed to a separate stream, because the stream is really the method by which that data is being collected. And if it's a reporting question of, say, we want the West Coast versus the East Coast to be showing different data and numbers, then I would set up a different property and not necessarily a different data stream. Now, each one of those would have its own data stream.
Right. And if I'm having not been behind the scenes in GA4, what I know that looks like, Patrick, when we work together is if you set up a different property, sometimes you have, like, if I remember correctly, there's raw, then there's filtered, right? And then there's master, right? And the master ends up.
Yeah.
Sorry. And if I'm telling your secrets, I'm not supposed to tell.
No.
But
no, it's not a secret. The problem is that isn't necessarily the case anymore.
Okay.
So one of the big differences is that the way that Google Analytics is set up historically is the account level, and then there are properties, and then there were views. And you could have 25 different views, and sometimes people would set up, regional views, or sections of a website had its own view, internal versus external had its own view. GA4 does not have views. And so everything happens on the property level.
Oh, okay.
So to set up what used to be considered multiple views, you do have to create multiple properties.
Okay.
So now the reason they did that in part is the filtering capabilities, in the reporting of GA4 can help create what you used to create with views.
Okay.
So,
all right. Patrick, I think we've have we covered everything? Thank you so much, Sterling, for your question. If we have any more, please let me know. I think we've covered getting the most value out of GA4, and it sounds like, if I'm again translating, what you put into it is going to help you get the most out of it at the beginning, right?
Right.
Okay. You were talking about, and you were just giving your example of, it only scrolls 90%. If you want to get to 100%, you have to do that. Is there, or are you, as you're doing this, actually developing maybe I'd say menu of, here are some common things, or do you just know the client to go ahead and put it in and you don't need to ask them? What's that looking like for you, or what would that look like for somebody who's considering this? Like, how do they know if they need to go deeper? Is there a checklist? Is there whatever? I mean, and for some people, I know we're talking about, literally we're speaking a little bit of gibberish, but I think for somebody who is into it and wants to do it correctly, how do they figure out how deep or how to take advantage of this value that GA4 offers?
And it is the same for the smallest organization as it is for the biggest organizations. And I've done all different sizes of these. It all starts the same way with a conversation. I won't, excuse me, begin to build custom tags or dimensions until we've had probably an hour-long conversation about, what do you need the site to do? What's important to you? What do you want to measure? In the same vein of not wanting to complicate things, GA4 is plenty overwhelming. I don't need to add to that mix.
That's the question, right?
Right. And so I think asking them, do you care if someone scrolls 25% or 75%, or is that just a vanity metric that you are never going to look at? And so even if you hire a consultant, that discovery phase is going to be important to understand, what do you value in your website and what actions do you want people to take and how are we going to measure that? But even if you don't hire a consultant, to sit down with your organization and just have a conversation of, hey, we have this website, which is an incredible asset to our organization. What do we want it to do? Right. And to determine how are we going to measure whether or not any time or effort is worth it when we are updating the website, generating content. What are we going to look at? And have that conversation internally before you start saying, oh, well, yeah, I want all of these different custom events, because I could throw a million different custom events at you. But
letting it start from the other side is probably easier than you holding out you offering the whole buffet and realizing that's just way too much.
I'll give you an example. So I'm in the process of a very complex GA4 conversion, and it's multiple search functions into multiple repositories. They want to know the keyword, they want to know the language, what was downloaded, what language is it downloaded in.
My head's hurting, Patrick.
And it was pretty complex the way we started talking about it. And then we really got into the conversation. Well, what do they need to know, and how do they need to slice and dice this information? And it actually became one of the most simplistic ways to do it. And what we thought was going to be, oh, this is going to be a ton of work, and it's still a lot of work. But really the beauty is in the simplicity, the elegance is in the simplicity of, okay, tell me what I need to know. That's what we're using these tools to do. Tell me what I need to know so I can start making better business decisions.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to just sort of say, if anybody else has any questions, I don't want to overstay our time. And Patrick, you know how much I love chatting with you and how much I love all this nerdiness. And then when my eyes glaze over, it's like, I have to stop. So the best way for people to reach you if they want to know more or they want help or support on this, or kind of better direction, I've put your email up here, patrick@powers.digital. But I can't say enough great things about Patrick. Like I said, we've worked on several sites together. He's maybe the pseudo SEO nerd that I am. And hang on, I'm just going to check and see if we have one more question. Oh, you're welcome, Phyllis. Phyllis says, thank you. This was very helpful. Yay!
Oh, thank you, Phyllis.
I appreciate it. And Patrick, I'll put sort of your contact information in the show notes as well. And sure. For anybody who wants to follow up, and I think if we do this right, this stays live on, this stays recorded on LinkedIn, and then I'll probably put it up on my website and or on YouTube. So thank you, those of you who were here live. I hope those of you who watch later, if you have any comments, reach out to us on LinkedIn. And Patrick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nancy. As always, it was a pleasure to chat with you.
I'm feeling like there might be a round 2 of this after
we can
July
get really
1st.
nerdy and in the weeds.
Yeah, I think there might be a version like a July, and after we've converted question of being like, remember all that stuff we talked about? Now you have to look at it. That's what we're gonna do. Anyway, thanks so much, Patrick. We'll see you soon, and this has been really helpful.
Thanks, Nancy.
Bye.